Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Stuart Iron Gutsman McCowan, and today we have a very original idea. We're doing a tier list video. Yeah. Now, I before you say anything, alright? Okay, so it is important that these are done. And the reason for that is I guess three reasons. The first one is to actually take some personal responsibility for your takes, alright? Because there's going to be a graphical representation of what I think at a certain time. And we can look back on it and say, Stuart, you were such an idiot. Why did you put X army in bin tier when they're in fact broken? Alright, something like, I don't think that's going to happen, but something like that, okay? I could be wrong, and I'm perfectly happy to take responsibility for those takes. Okay, another reason is, well, there's two books that are coming out soon, Lumineth and Tzeentch, in the next, I think, probably month and a half that come out, right? And those are going to have a huge influence on the meta, and I kind of like to get a snapshot of where we are now after the new General's Handbook has come out. And the third thing is that I've actually had some time to play a lot of games now. So I kind of have a rough vibe of where we're at. Not everything has turned out the way I thought it would. So I think with decent accuracy, I think we can make this tier list now. Okay? Now, I know there's going to be some salty people in the comments. I understand that. If my army was put in bin tier, I would be a little bit hurt. But just before you write a snarky comment, just take a deep breath and just realize that I am a human like you, and we may have different opinions, but that doesn't mean that we can't love each other and enjoy each other's content and opinions, okay? Alright, so that's that. That's out of the way. So here is the tier list. Now, there's more tiers probably than a lot of other people would include, and the reason for that is because when I was preparing this, like, I kind of struggled to not make a giant big tier in the middle, so I kind of wanted some more spread here. Now, I've put win rate percentages as an indication of, like, the tier here, okay? Because often when I watch a video, I find I'm not entirely sure what the person is, like, putting as the middle. So here, the middle is somewhere between A and B, and the reason that I put C, D, and bin down the bottom there is because if the God tier stuff is really strong, then it should also push stuff, like, down to the bottom, right? Theoretically, okay? So, I guess straight away from my tier structure, you can probably see that there's going to be a lot of stuff in S and God tier, because there has to be more tiers if that's the case, alright? But, yeah, and that's true, okay, but let's see what I put in there, alright? So, we're going to go through each of these armies, and I'm going to talk about how the handbook has changed them. If they've got a new battle tome, like Sylvaneth or Skaven, give like a rough go through of that battle tome, like the strengths and weaknesses, and we'll see how we go. Now, I have kind of shuffled it around a little bit because I didn't want it to just be alphabetical order. I will include a link in the description if you guys want to use this tier list to make your own tier list. I'm totally happy if you like tweet it at me. I'll even give you some feedback if you want. Yeah, I made this on Tier Maker because the other ones didn't have a few of the armies like Legion of the First Prince and all the Orc armies, which I'm talking about in isolation because they are kind of separate armies. But yeah, I think that's enough of an intro. As you can probably hear, there's a lot of thunder going on in the background. As always, Japan is an adventure in summer in terms of the weather. It's either like 38, so like for Americans it's like 100 and something, or it's just raining. Yeah, it's tricky. Okay, so let's get into it. So the first thing we want to start with is Nurgle. Okay, so you guys know I play this army a lot. When the dust settles, for this army is probably the best performing video on my channel. I really like this army. Now, how do I feel like it is in the new edition? Well, it feels a little more internally balanced, I would say, than last edition, where really flies and some of the monsters were a step above everything else, okay? But I think the reason that it's more entirely balanced is just because the fires got a bit worse, okay? Now, initially when the edition changed, I was a little bit skeptical about Games Workshop not nerfing the flyers. I think a lot of people were, but there's been a number of changes, mainly the endless spells that I think kind of make them quite a bit worse. So, the two endless spells that really hurt this army, I would say, are Geminids and Purple Sun. Just because the army already had a bit of a weakness to high-range shooting, like Iron Drakes and that kind of thing. Towards the end of the edition, I think we saw like Kronda's Hallowheart with Iron Drakes as like a pretty solid counter to Nurgle because they just kill enough. And now with access to extra Ren for a lot of armies, there are more armies that can do that. So, is the army still like strong against armies like Seraphon? I think so, but armies like Cities of Sigmar and KOs, we'll get into it, I think is just really awful for these guys. So that does push them down a little bit. Now, with that said, I'm not going to put them in the B tier, okay? I think these guys have to go in the A tier still. Obviously, an incredibly strong book still, with a wealth of options. Try out Rotbringer Sorcerers if you feel like having fun. Yeah, I think these guys are great. Okay, so, moving on. Ironjaws. Ironjaws. Okay, so, where are these guys at last edition? Well, they've had I would say, a strong negative trajectory since the book came out. I really do not like the way that the book is written. It's very one-dimensional. I think the internal balance is really problematic because Gorgrunters are basically better than everything else in the book. I think it was more interesting when you had Amulet of Destiny, actually, because taking 2 Crushers was kind of more of a thing. But now I think probably just 1 Crusher with a bunch of pigs is the best list. And how good is that list? Like, it's pretty good on one level because you can put the Gorgrunters and Bounty Hunters, and they do heaps of damage. But there are so many armies that counter these guys. Purple Sun is horrible for them. Horrorghast is horrible for them. Yeah, I'm not positive on these guys, and I don't think that many people are playing them at the moment. I think that, unfortunately, the Orruk Warclans book is just not going to have that much longevity outside of Big War unless they see, like, changes the way that Bonesplitterz and Kruleboyz have, because it's just not that much depth in the book that I can see, really. Yeah, bit of a shame. I'm going to put these guys in the D tier for now. I don't think they're quite bin tier. They're better than the inclusions that are in the bin tier, but I think these guys are still going to struggle. Alright, Big War. I think this is a slight inclusion, a slight improvement over Ironjaws. They've got access to like bonuses to cast, stuff like that. Bit more of diversity of unit choice. Yeah, I think these guys are a little bit better than Ironjaws. How much better? Probably only a little bit. So I think these guys are sitting happy in the, I would say probably like 43% win rate. Probably something like that, right? Yeah. Something like that. Okay. Next we have Ogors. So I would say with these guys, if they were C tier or above, I would be playing them because I love them. But they're not. So the decision is whether to put them in the D or bin tier, and if I compare them to Ironjaws, there is a massive gap here. Ironjaws are better in almost every respect. If you compare Gorgrunters to Mournfang, if you compare Maulcrushers to Stonehorns, yeah. I think, unfortunately, we have our first bin tier recipient. I'm just going to shuffle the rest, okay? Just because there's some stuff I want to get to later rather than earlier. Alright, so that's our stuff so far. Now, the reason Ogors are so bad is because the battle line choices are really awkward, because if you make, lead belters battle lines, they become GVs, which is really bad for that kind of unit that's already squishy for its points. You could take Mournfang as your battle line, but they're really expensive and they're not worth their points in terms of damage, or even durability. 12 wins for 180 points is terrible. Actually, there might be 160, but I think they're 160, but it's still bad. Yeah, no, I don't like them. Unfortunately, I like Yetis being GVs. It's kind of funny. They die, but like at least they get better coherency. But I don't think the army's that great. Okay. Kharadron Overlords. Now, we've seen these guys do really well in the tournaments at the start of edition, with some legal lists and some illegal lists. By the way, everyone's done it, alright? Like, I want us to kind of move on for, like, calling people out for running illegal lists, because it is kind of their responsibility, but it's also the TO's responsibility, and it happens. I've run tournaments before, people have had illegal lists that I haven't found. It just happens, alright? It's crappy when it happens, especially when a person performs well, but let's, I think we can be adults about it. Okay, so, these guys have really benefited from a number of changes. First of all, they're White Dwarf, so they've got Admiral stuff to ignore wards, alright? And then they've also got, and plus on Rend, and they've also got access to Purple Sun now, which I think is great. There's other options as well. You can go the Rune of Petrifaction from Lumineth Realm Lords, which is only 40 points and is great. Stuff like that. There's heaps of options to the bottle. I think you probably go Zilfa now instead of Thring, even though they're both great. I think this army has a lot more options than it used to. I think it's still essentially double clad. But yeah, this army's great. And I think it counters a lot of the stuff that's in the top half of the game. So I think the decision for me is whether to put these guys in S or God tier. But I think because they're so priority reliant, even at their current level of strength, that I'm going to have to put them in S tier, okay? Very strong army, but they have some problems that need to be addressed in terms of the priority thing. Okay, Fyreslayers. Very strong army. Has a weakness to shooting. Alright, that's the first thing we need to get out of the way. So, immediately, because they have a weakness to shooting, I'm not going to put them anywhere higher than A tier. So the decision for me is whether to put them in B or A tier, okay? Now, last edition, I think I probably would have put them in A tier, and I think they've gotten slightly better, even with the meta shift towards more shooting, because their units have gotten a lot better. Like, Volkites are actually quite good Galatian veterans, because they have, pile in on death and stuff like that. That was loud. It's getting scary here, guys. Holy moly. Yeah, but because they have pile in on death, right? So let's say your opponent sends the bounty hunters in, and you're able to pile in on death with the Volkite Berserkers. You can kind of like trade your GV units for the bounty hunters, which is really great because, you know, your opponent only has a limited amount of bounty hunters. So if you can trade into them, and keep your GVs alive on the board, either, you know, maybe you keep you're left with one model, for example. You inspire and presence it, and then rally it back with the Battlesmith on a 4-up, stuff like that. I think these guys are great. I think they're A tier, really solid army, tons of fun to play. The models are for a particular kind of person, but I really like these. These guys are good now, and there's a diversity of builds that are possible. Yeah, I'm a big fan. Okay, Cities of Sigmar. Yeah, these guys are amazing now. Now, Living Cities got nerfed, so I think that's kind of fallen down a little bit, but the top of the table for me has to be Hallowheart. Yeah, I think these guys are great at the moment with the changes to endless spells. You can do stuff like, you know, bring in a Stormcast Eternals, Lord Arcanon for the extra range on the endless spells. They've got access to heaps of allies. There's heaps of good allies that you can put in there, like Avatars of Khaine and stuff like that. Like, you just pick good war scrolls from other books and you put them in. I think these guys are awesome. They're hard to work out. Like, you really have to sit down and math through the units because there's so many war scrolls which are like, what does this thing even do? But I think the best options are Hallowheart and Tempesai, and then Hammerhall a little bit behind that, and then I think there's quite a drop before probably Living City is the next one. But I think these guys are really strong. Now, I think I'm going to put them in the S tier, but if I compare them to KO, they're a little less reliable than KO. So I think I'm happy to put them towards, I think they're probably like sitting around the 55 kind of level. Yeah, something like that, okay? Alright. Okay, Disciples of Tzeentch. These guys are interesting. Now, I think their strength largely depends on how Destiny dice are ruled. By that I mean, you know, when you re-roll a casting roll, can you then use Destiny dice on that casting roll? Most people say no, but you like at Worlds, for example, it was ruled that you could. I think there are certain players who are really good at this army, and then a lot of people are bad at them. They're really tricky to play, because it's a mid-range spell army, with really good summoning, and quite, because it's been nerfed now, like kind of janky kind of play. I'm not going to talk about them too much because they're going to get a new book, but I think for now I'm happy to put them in the B tier. Yeah, I'm sure people can perform with them, but I think overall they're probably going to be a little bit weaker. I think weaker players will struggle to go higher than 2 and 3 with them, and then good players probably can go 4-1 with them. something like that. So I think that sits them around the B, C tier-ish kind of level for now. Okay, we have Kruleboyz. Right. Yeah, now, people who know me know that I don't think this army is any good. Yeah, now the decision to me is just whether it's worse than Ogres or not. It's just way too squishy. Massive weakness to magic. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, the Grinning Blades really helps against targeted, like, stuff that needs line of sight, but there's so much stuff that doesn't, especially magic, so, like, all the endless spells don't, Comet's Call doesn't. Yeah, it's just an awkward army to play. Like, the Bolt Boys struggle in Grinning Blades without the extra 3-inch range, just because their threat range is so low, that it's really easy to play around, like hiding heroes and stuff. If you just put them 24.1, they can't do anything about it, right? I think if you're going to run them, you should run Bridge. Hard to get off, but it gives you, like, some extra threat. But yeah, I think these guys are a bin. Sorry. I think we all know that. Even with the changes, yeah, hard to play. I'm sure some people will do alright with them, but I think they're been a bit of a rough spot. Okay, Seraphon. Oh boy. I feel like Games Workshop might be at their wits' end with this army, because I think for them it feels like every time they nerf them, they accidentally make them better. And I've said this before, but the reason for that is because every time they nerf Seraphon, they also nerf all of its counters, and all of the things that it might find a little bit tricky. So, like, for example, this edition, I think Purple Sun has really nerfed Nurgle quite a bit. And it's buffed Seraphon quite a bit. So even though Seraphon have got a little bit of a nerf in terms of Skinks now not getting -1 damage and Thunder Lizards, I still think that Thunder Lizards Seraphon is with, I think, 2 main builds. I think Croak should be in all the builds, but it's just a question of whether you want to go with the defensive, like, Snake Basties, or go more of, like, a shooty Bastie kind of thing. Yeah, I think this guy, I think we know this, right? It happened again! Yeah, another year of Seraphon being completely broken. Yeah. Get me out. You know, I would like to say at this point that the whole time, all we needed to do was just nerf the Slann, and that would have just made, like, a massive difference. Like, just nerf the Slann or Croak, and then that's going to make the army, like, way worse. I don't know, even something small, like requiring Comet's Call to have line of sight would just go a long way. So many things that could be done. I think just get rid of the whole they can unbind anywhere on the board. That's just complete nonsense, especially with Croak, like having +3 to unbind. It's nonsense. Yep. Okay. Alright, so we have an interesting one. I've realized to put the Japanese version of the battle tome here, which is kind of fun. That's what it looks like for people who are interested. Yeah, kinda. Okay, so Soulblight Gravelords are kind of an interesting army. Always have been, like, they have, like, some clear strengths and weaknesses. Like, obviously strengths is, like, massive ability to flood the board. Weaknesses are, like, hammers are generally slow. So, like, the Graveguard. And aside from that, there's not really, like, a true hammer. So, it's often hard to blow through stuff that you want. But the heroes are incredibly strong in this army. And I think endless spells are something that's going to benefit these guys a lot. Now, I think the decision for me is whether to put these guys in B or A tier. And looking at the other armies that are there, I probably would be inclined to put them in B tier above Tzeentch. I don't think they're at the level of Fyreslayers and Nurgle, and I think Fyreslayers and Nurgle should win those matchups quite comfortably. And I think everything above them at the top of the table should beat them, but the stuff below them, I think you'd be comfortable with saying that they would beat. So, I think this is a good position for them. Okay, Sylvaneth. Obviously, a new book that's really interesting. I'll just scroll down a little bit. So, I think a lot of people on the list review focused on, like, the really good aspects of the book, which obviously what you do when you look through the book. Sorry, not list review, book review. You focus on the good aspects of the book, like what sort of armies can you build with the book. But there are obviously some like major weaknesses here, which they've definitely intentionally put in the book, and I really like this book design. I've loved all the new battle tomes that have come out, by the way, like including Nighthaunt and other armies like that. Like there's this like clear weaknesses and clear strengths. Like this army does this great, this army does this terribly. So in the case of Sylvaneth, the thing that they wanted to balance out with this army was because of like all the teleports and stuff that they have available to them. They wanted to make it so the army has access to a lot of teleports and janky strategy, but doesn't lock you out of the board. I think that was the intention with this army. So everything is quite expensive, especially the heroes are really expensive. Like the War Song at 300 points is it's a lot of points for a 2-caster, right? So everything is really expensive. Strike and Fade is amazing, but you can only do it with 1 unit. So immediately you kind of get this idea with this army being kind of like you do one thing at a time in terms of doing damage, and then the rest of your play is kind of setting up for later turns, doing battle tactics, stuff like that. So I think this army is really strong, don't get me wrong, but I think, when we're considering win rate, is it going to be over 50% or under 50%? So again, it's that decision between A and B tier for me, and I think the fact that it is so elite and also very difficult to play, I think probably puts it in this B tier, and I would probably put it below Soulblight Gravelords. Now, I know we are also considering competitive, so I'm trying to balance the idea of like, really good players playing it and like less experienced players playing it. But I think with Sylvaneth, even amongst what we would consider good players, it's still going to take a really long time to get used to the army, because it's kind of it's even more finessey than it used to be, because you now get even less. So really strong army, but very small, very elite, very hard to play, I think. Okay, so we have a new one now. We have Legion of the First Prince. Okay. These guys were awesome last edition. Be'lakor, very difficult to kill. All that kind of thing. Now, there was a massive attempt to nerf them in the sense that they got rid of Be'lakor's bodyguard, but at the same time, they removed priority targets for killing Be'lakor and the Demon Prince. And also, the army now has access to an Incarnate, and I think probably because of the fact that they have Be'lakor, Kairos, and a Khorne Demon Prince, they are the best army in the game to use an Incarnate, because you can stop your opponent from killing the Incarnate when you want. Very easy to like guarantee the Incarnate getting into combat with the thing that it needs to. So this might be a slightly hot take, but I think this army is still god tier. Okay, at a competitive level, I think without some more changes, I think that this army will still completely destroyish. Now it's like in a sense it's harder to play because bounty hunters will kill your pinks and stuff like that. But I just think the Incarnate will lift the army up to a level that's quite oppressive, to be honest. Keep in mind 60% win rate, like, is still under an average of a 4-1. So, when we're talking about, like, these god tier armors, we're not talking about stuff that can auto win. We're just talking about stuff that's going to, like, win a lot of games. And the fact that you've got Be'lakor, Khorne Demon Prince, and Kairos means that you're going to get ahead early. And because the battle plans at the moment are so low scoring, I think that's probably enough for you to win most of your games at a tournament. So that's why I think these guys are god tier. Okay, now Slaves to Darkness is the next one. Has access to a lot of the same things. Okay, so you could take Be'lakor, Khorne Demon Prince, and an Incarnate. And you can also do some janky stuff like take a bunch of small monsters now, because you don't give away monster points, and eat them with the Incarnate. That's what I've been doing lately. It's hilarious. There's stuff like Varangard in Knights of the Empty Throne. There's stuff like Archeon. I think these guys are still really strong. So for me, the question is whether to put them in A or S tier, and I think now I'm comfortable putting them around the same sort of level as Nurgle. The decision with Fyreslayers is a tricky one. I think for now I'll put them slightly above Fyreslayers in terms of win rate. I think they're quite comfortably sitting here. Okay. Alright, next we have Daughters of Khaine. Okay, so the question is this army still Marathian the Bow Snakes? I think yes, with a couple asterisks. I think Marathi, Bow Snakes, and some Blood Sisters is the best build. I think that's stronger than it used to be. There are some other builds like with spamming avatars. I think it's pretty strong as well. But the army still struggles with the prospect of that it's a slow, for the most part, undurable melee army. Okay? So, like, if you're going to spam a bunch of Witch Elves, I know they have run and charge, and +1 to run and charge, but in the current state of the game, that's just not that fast. It's just not. Like, if you play against other armies, like Flesh Eater Courts, for example, they will just outspeed you and win anyway. These guys suck against shooting, like, majorly. Yeah. So I know the army, like, looks amazing with the battle tactics and all the damage and that kind of thing, but in practical terms, a melee, relatively slow-moving, undurable army is just a bad archetype, okay? So these guys, I think, are most effective when they're run as, like, Morathi, some bow snakes, and some spear snakes. I think that's the best build, because you've got some shooting. Morathi will kind of help you not just fall over in the early game to, like, certain shooting armies. The Blood Sisters are probably the best melee threat in that book. I would take the Iron Scale to give them run and charge, because otherwise the threat range is, like, really small and super easy to play around, so I would do that. But I don't think these guys are in the A tier. I think they're probably towards the top of B. I think I would predict they're going to have something like a 48% win rate this edition, because I don't think that they necessarily stack up to any of the stuff above here. You could make an argument between them and Fyreslayers. I don't think there's a huge gap there, but if we're talking about these top 6 armies that I see at the top here, they're a step above Daughters of Khaine. That's my personal opinion. Okay, Skaven. Skaven is an interesting one, because like, you guys know I love this book, but the army obviously has, again, like Sylvaneth, like, a major weakness in that. So almost every war scroll in the Skaven book does way too much damage for its points, but it just lacks durability. So like, against certain, like, one-drop shooting, or, like, you know, for example, KO, stuff like this, I think it might be a bit tricky to stay up on the board. But there are definitely builds in Skaven that I think can maybe tech into that a little bit. There's obviously some great shooting builds as well, which, if you can, like, make it low drop, you can probably kind of shoot off a lot of the shooting stuff before it shoots you. Not all of the armies there, but, like, for example, cities, you could potentially do that. So I think the army's good. So the decision, again, for me with this army is whether to put it in A or B tier, and I think I'm comfortable with putting it in A tier for now, above Fyreslayers and Slaves to Darkness, probably below Nurgle, something like that. Yeah, I think that probably looks about right to me. Okay, Nighthaunt. Again, another army with clear strengths and weaknesses. The strengths are that you can kind of ignore bounty hunters with the Cruciator. Obviously, if you get the charge off with your army, you just wipe whatever it is. Like, if you guys haven't played against Nighthaunt, I know it looks like they don't have that much damage, but, like, it's actually the total opposite of that. The army actually does completely insane damage. Like, way too much damage on basically every unit, because of just stacking -1 save and stuff like that, and also access to, like, +1 to hit and wound, and then 6 to hit auto wound. So you can just have, like, even, like, Spirit Host just having all of their attacks basically going through because of that, those rules. But I think the army is mostly slow, with the exception of Hex, Race, and like Rakanor. It's mostly a slow army, and it's mostly a melee castle army. And there are quite a few battle plans now where that archetype is not that strong, and I think a lot of the stuff in the top half of the table can still pants them by shooting a lot of their army off. Like, KO can probably just kill half a Nighthaunt army first turn, and I think it's going to be hard for them to win after that. So, where are we going to put them? I think I'm happy to put these guys in the A tier, okay, and I think I'm going to put them probably, it's a decision between them and Nurgle. I think I'm going to put them above Nurgle, so something like here I think is a good place for them. Like, really strong army, but I think there's a few intrinsic weaknesses, which are great that they put them in there, but they're going to hold them back from being up here. Okay, Beasts of Chaos. What do you think these guys are going to be? Yeah, up here. Now, the decision for me is whether to put them above Seraphon or below Seraphon, and for now, I'm going to put them above Seraphon, okay? Alright, I think these guys are, I think for me, quite comfortably the strongest army in the game. Now, I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's just the Zangul War Scroll and summoning at the moment is the problem with this army. Now, the army is not that easy to play, because while it doesn't have that many rules, people are used to the rules kind of telling them how to play the game, if that makes sense. Like, there's a rule that says, you know, your army, like, shoots in this way, like, this range, so you got to put them in here, and then they do that, right? Whereas Beasts of Chaos, like, it's more the army is quite abstract in the way that it's written, because it feels like it wasn't intended to be good and then was accidentally good. So that's why the army feels like a little bit directionless when you play it, especially since a lot of the units do the same thing. You know, like, a lot of them just have high rend, poor quality attacks now, with the exception of Zangor. Like, they're your, like, true hammer. Plenty of other builds you could take. We just saw Adam Mumford go 5-0 with cockatrices on the weekend, which probably doesn't have that much to do with cockatrices and more to do with the strength of the book. As much as, look, love Adam to pieces. Yeah, so happy for him that he won. But I think overall the book is just at like a crazy level of strength, and has been since that White Dwarf update, really. So I think I'm happy to put them here. Now, are they good against Seraphon? No. So that's kind of a strange thing that they're going to be above Seraphon in that ranking. But I think against, like, especially a lot of the melee armies that are, like, you know, stuff like Skaven, Nighthaunt, Nurgle, Fyreslayers, Slaves to Darkness, Daughters of Khaine, Soulblight, Sylvaneth, like, all those armies that should just completely just demolish, in my opinion. So it's, yeah, I think they're just incredibly strong. Like, towards the end of last edition, I was thinking that this is the strongest army in the game, and I think they've got better, and my opinion has not changed. Okay, Bonesplitterz. Interesting one. I would say by far the strongest sub-faction in the Orruk warclans book right now, which is hilarious. So the question is, how strong are they? Well, they've got some, the Ignore Wards thing is great. And they've kind of got enough like shit on the board that I don't think shooting armors can necessarily get rid of all of them. But and with an incarnate as well, this army is incredibly strong. This army is like one of the best users of the incarnate. So I think for me, I'm actually kind of happy to put these guys in B tier, and I would say probably like the top of B tier, maybe below Doc. Yeah, I think somewhere like here. I think these guys are pretty strong. You know, I don't think they're S tier or anything, but I think they're happy to be in the B tier, aren't they? I think that's pretty good for Bonesplitterz. Okay. Next we have Flesh Eater Courts. Okay, so I'm going to put these guys in the top of C tier, okay? Now, you guys, I've actually been playing this army recently, and I think it's quite interesting. I think it has the potential to be a good army, but I'm just not sure. It's one of those things where it sort of depends on where the meta heads in terms of inclusion of bounty hunters or not. Because if there's ever a point where people stop taking bounty hunters, then Flesh Eater Courts running a load of Crypt Horrors or Crypt Flayers is gonna just like be amazing. But right now, as it stands, most people are running bounty hunters, so I can't put these guys necessarily above the C. Yeah, and again, the army still struggles with some reliability, because it's hard to get the spells off that you need to get off without, like, you know, you want to go Hollowmourn, but if you go Hollowmourn, it's hard to get, like, more than +1 on your archery, and you can't do that and be low drop. So I think these guys are pretty comfortably sitting here for now. Okay, Bone Reapers, I think are about the same position. I'm probably going to put these guys above Ironjaws, below Flesh Eater Courts. I know someone just went 5-0 with them. What a legend. But I think overall the army is going to struggle against a lot of this stuff in the top table that's got a lot of shooting. They struggle against armies that have late game because they don't have any late game. It still sucks that you can't do anything on your opponent's turn with these guys. Like, you're just sitting there with all your IDP and you just can't, like, really do anything. There's, like, really good magic in this army. That's one thing to explore. But I think, overall, the lack of durability and late game is going to bring these guys' win rate quite a bit down. I think you could even make an argument to put them in the D tier here, but I think C, where they are now, is probably about right. Okay. Khorne. Yeah, it's an interesting one because they look really strong on paper. And the first time I've seen them played, I thought they were, like, amazing. But, yeah, I'm not necessarily sure they're going to be anything higher than a 50% win rate. And the reason for that is just because they're still, like, a little bit priority dependent. And still, like, if Scarbrand gets shot off, in my opinion, there's just not enough of a damage threat because the Boom Thirster is just too unreliable. And, like, if your opponent doesn't have a bunch of MSU stuff, it's just not going to, I think, do enough in the turn that it goes in. Still stuff can happen, like you go in and kill all the stuff in front of you and you can't double pile in. Yeah, I think it's still a little bit of an awkward army to get anything higher than a 4-1 with. Now, with that said, I would probably be a bit uncomfortable putting it in the B tier. So I think for now we're gonna put it, like, towards the bottom of A. I think I'll put it, like, here, something like there looks about right to me. Like a strong army, but I think I would be uncomfortable putting in anything higher than that. Okay. Alright, so getting towards the end here, but we have Gloomspite Gits. You guys know I did a video about them around recently, so you might be wondering, like, what my opinion of them is. Well, I think, quite frankly, I think I'm going to struggle to put them anything higher than D. I'll put them below Ironjaws as well. Like, I just think the army still is just awful against shooting, unfortunately. And with a lot of this stuff up here, like, if you look at all the stuff up here, from about A to God, I think it's a struggle. Now, ironically, Seraphon is actually not an awful matchup, but, like, KO, Cities, Nighthaunt, I mean, even Ossiarch Bone Reapers is a pretty awful matchup. Yeah, I think it's rough for us. Like, there's some kind of funny stuff along the way that you wouldn't expect us to be decent against. Like, I think Nurgle is actually okay. I think Khorne is okay as well, actually. Stuff like this, like Doc is fine. Like, a lot of these, like, melee armies that do a lot of damage but aren't necessarily that durable if you have, like, Rend, I think you can do well with as Gits. But it's just the shooting armies that are a bit of a challenge. Yeah, I'm going to put them here for now. I would love if someone works out a build that's better than this. Obviously, we know they're getting a new book soon, so I had sort of stopped thinking about them because of that, but I think here is pretty decent spot for them. Okay, Slaanesh. Another person just went, Anthony Trentinelli over in the US just went 5-0 with this army. I've seen heaps of people do well with this army, especially compared to how it used to be. Okay. But we really need to consider what else is up the top here, and a lot of the armies can pants this Hedonites of Slaanesh army. You can shoot off all the Bliss Barbs, and then you're kind of left with, I mean, you're including an Incarnate and Sigveld every time you run this army. So those are your main melee threats. I'm going to put these guys in the B tier. I think for now that's more or less where they're going to sit. Yeah, I think they're sitting there pretty comfortably. Now, where would I put them in here? I think they're probably stronger than Soulblight, slightly stronger than Bonesplitterz. About the same as Doc, something like that. Yeah. Okay, Sons of Behemat. Sons of Behemat. Now, it slightly depends with this army on how Proving Ground is ruled, because if it's ruled that you can capture objectives that are set as a Proving Ground, they're slightly better. But I'm not convinced by this army. Now, in a sense, they're always going to have a decent win rate because of, like, if people make mistakes against them, you can kind of win games. But now that bonus points for scoring with monster stuff is kind of gone away, and I think a lot of the battle tactics are actually a little bit difficult for them. Like, for example, doing bars through enemy lines or desecrate their land is kind of hard for them. I know desecrate their lands you kind of count as 30, but you still got to like get there is the problem. And on like a lot of battle plans with small territories, you're not necessarily going to have a Gargant there, especially because it's quite a defensive army. You know, stuff like Eye for an Eye is not that easy because you've actually got to lose a giant, and if you lose a giant, then I think you're already in like kind of a bad spot. So it's kind of like a battle tech that you can get when you've already started losing. So I think these guys are pretty bad. The decision for me is to put them in D or bin. I think just because of their objective capturing, I'd have to actually put them like probably at the top of D. Even though the army I think is quite bad. The fact that you can still kind of dominate the objective game, even with Proving Grounds, as long as you go second, it's okay, right? So, yeah, I think around here is probably comfortable. Okay, towards the end now, we have 2 more Elven armies. Lumineth Realm Lords. Yeah, now towards the end of last edition, I would say that I publicly I would admit that I thought they were stronger than they actually were. The shooting is still like completely obnoxious, but the objective game is an issue for these guys, especially at the current state where it's tricky to capture objectives with wardens without just them getting completely rinsed off by bounty hunters. So I think in terms of win rate, it's a tricky one because while they've got a difficult thing in the objective game, if you look at all the stuff in A tier here, it's all actually really weak to Lumineth Realm Lords. So I'm actually going to put it at the top of A tier, okay? And it could be an S tier as well, to be honest, but I'm reluctant to put it there just because of the Wardens thing. But if you just look at the kind of stuff that it's surrounded by in this A tier box, I think it's comfortable to win most of those matchups, so I'm happy to put it here. Okay, we have our last army. Now this army is interesting because I think it has 1 build, and that's spamming Reavers. How good is that build? Pretty damn good. So, but I don't want to put an army in S tier that only has 1 build. So I'm gonna put it in A tier, and I'm gonna put it at the same level as Lumineth Realm Lords because it's kind of the same army. Shooting with magic. Yeah. By the way, the list is you take a Soul Scryer, 70 Reavers, the Sea, and a Lore Seeker, and Geminids and Purple Sun. Your whole army except the Sea starts off the board. The Sea has a teleport spell. Your whole army goes in. It's 140 shots. If you get both the spells off, it's basically Ren 3. Horrific. Okay, horrific. Well, that's the army. Alright, so that brings us to the end of our tier list. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Yeah, now there's probably some stuff in between like A and B that I think people will maybe take issue with, like Daughters of Khaine. Maybe that should be in A tier. Maybe Slaves of Darkness should be in B tier. Maybe Fyreslayers should be in B tier. But this kind of like distinction between A and B is probably the most difficult. But I think the God S and then C downwards is probably pretty right. But I mean, look at how many armies in the middle now. This is great. There's like, I think the stuff towards the bottom might even be lower than 35%. Like Kruleboyz might even have like a 25% win rate. Like soon, I don't know, man. But yeah, I think that's the state of the meta at the moment. I'm interested to see what the new books have had. Let me know what you think about this tier list in the comments below. Although I was saying about the salty comments before, I don't care actually. It's fine. You can say, Stuart, you're an idiot. Have you seen how broken the Daughters of Khaine battle techniques are? And I'll be like, yeah. And they can get 15 battle techs if they want, but there's only 5 turns. You can't score more than 5 battle tactics, people. That's the thing. So, you know, even if you have 10 that are doable, that actually doesn't make that much of a difference. Okay, so that's the end of today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Bit of a different one than I would normally do, but I just thought it would be cool to do this kind of video at this point in the new General's Handbook. Okay, so that's the end of the video. I will see you guys later. Please subscribe and check out my Patreon if you're interested in getting like some list feedback and some coaching stuff, as well as like early access to new videos and stuff like that. Yeah, alright, I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.